Imagine this. It's midnight and you're staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster with your eyes because sleep refuses to come. In the darkness, the world feels silent, except for the quiet, gnawing questions that never seem to rest. You think about your relationships, your desires, the strange dance of attraction and expectation that plays out endlessly between men and women. The air is thick with unspoken truths, as if every breath you take dares you to admit something you have always known, but never had the courage to say aloud. There's a man you know, maybe he's your lover, your brother, your father, or the stranger whose gaze lingers a second too long on the subway. He carries himself with a certain confidence, or maybe a practiced nonchalance. You've seen him laugh too loudly, speak too assertively, or retreat into silence when the conversation cuts too close to the bone. You sense the storms beneath his surface, the restlessness, the hunger, the quiet fear of being unmasked. And yet, when you look into his eyes, you recognize yourself. The same longing, the same uncertainty, the same ache for meaning. Now imagine peeling back the veil that divides what men and women say from what they actually feel. Picture a world where every secret belief, every hidden insecurity, every brutal truth was suddenly laid bare, like opening a diary you never meant anyone else to read. What would you find in those forbidden pages? Would you see the desires men dare not voice, the wounds they carry in silence, the contradictions that twist their hearts into knots? Or would you find something far more disturbing, a confession so raw, so unvarnished, that it threatens the very foundation of how you've come to understand yourself and the opposite sex? Here's the paradox that haunts the midnight hours. Women live surrounded by men, fathers, sons, lovers, friends, yet there are truths about those men that women will never admit, not even to themselves. Not because they're incapable, but because doing so would shatter the comforting stories we tell about gender, power, and intimacy. There are realities so uncomfortable, so brutally honest, that to acknowledge them would be to tear a hole in the fabric of our most cherished illusions. Ask yourself, why in a world obsessed with transparency and authenticity, do certain truths remain unspeakable? Why do women who pride themselves on emotional intelligence often turn away from the most unsettling aspects of male psychology? Is it because these truths threaten the narratives that make love and partnership possible? Or is it because facing them would force us to confront our own complicity in a web of denial? Consider the contradiction. Women are told that men are simple, driven by primal urges, creatures of action and appetite. Yet every woman has seen moments, fleeting, almost invisible, when the mask slips and something infinitely more complex glimmers beneath. A flash of vulnerability, a glimpse of existential terror, a wordless plea for understanding. These moments are quickly smoothed over, hidden beneath jokes or bravado, but they never fully disappear. They linger like ghosts at the edge of consciousness, daring you to look closer. But what if you did? What if you allowed yourself to see men not as archetypes or adversaries, but as mirrors, reflecting back your own fears, your own contradictions, your own yearning to be seen and understood? Would you have the courage to admit the truths you suspect, but have never spoken? Or would you retreat, as so many do, into the safety of half-truths and comforting stereotypes? There's a reason these truths remain buried. To unearth them is to risk everything: certainty, comfort, even love itself. For what if the brutal truth women will never admit about men is not that men are strong or weak, noble or base, but that they are, at their core, profoundly, terrifyingly human? What if the real danger is not what men do to women, but what men and women do to themselves by refusing to see each other clearly? As you lie awake in the darkness, feeling the weight of these questions press down on your chest, you sense that something vast and unsettling lies just out of reach. The stories we tell about men, about what they want, what they fear, what they cannot say, are only the surface of a deeper, more turbulent sea. And you, whether you admit it or not, are already adrift. The hour grows late, but the questions linger. How deep are you willing to dive? How much truth can you bear? And most haunting of all, if you were finally to see the brutal truth about men, would you ever be able to look at yourself or them the same way again? What if the greatest secret is not the truth itself, but our desperate need to keep it hidden? The answers lie just beneath the surface, waiting for the brave to seek them out. But be warned, once you start to dig, you may never see the world with innocent eyes again. You begin to sense the shape of the hidden problem, like the outline of a leviathan just below the rippling surface of the water. But to truly see it, you must descend into the depths, where raw instinct, ancient myth, and the silent machinery of the mind converge. Every civilization has carried its own stories about men: the stoic provider, the violent conqueror, the misunderstood poet, the lost boy. These are not merely cultural artifacts, they are psychic blueprints, etched into the collective unconscious. Carl Jung called them archetypes, energies that swirl beneath our waking thoughts, animating our fears and desires. The masculine in Jung's vision is not merely a biological fact, but a psychic territory, a forest of shadows, of power and impotence, nobility and shame. But here in the modern world, something has gone awry. Our narratives about men, what they are, what they want, what they are allowed to feel, have grown brittle, even as the terrain beneath them shifts and buckles. Women taught to seek vulnerability and emotional depth find themselves confronted by men who wear armor forged by centuries of expectation. Men are told to be strong, but never too strong, sensitive, but not soft, ambitious, but not ruthless. Each instruction is a contradiction, a double bind that cannot be escaped. Nietzsche warned that when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. To contemplate the truths men carry is to feel the abyss stir, a cauldron of longing, inadequacy, and rage. For beneath the surface gestures of masculinity, the confident handshake, the calculated risk, the forced laughter, lurks a secret knowledge that the world expects men to be both everything and nothing at once. You sense it in the way men walk, not just a stride, but a performance. You see it in their eyes when they're alone, briefly unmasked, caught in a moment of self-doubt or existential fatigue. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw life as a ceaseless struggle, a will to survive and to assert meaning against the void. For men, the struggle is not only external, but internal, for they are measured against an ideal that no flesh and blood mortal can fulfill. Women, meanwhile, are taught to read emotional nuance, to decode the subtle language of gesture and tone. They pride themselves on seeing what lies beneath. But there are places within the male psyche that remain sealed, not by accident, but by necessity. Viktor Frankl, in his Meditations on Suffering, wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Men, confronted by the impossibility of perfect masculinity, often retreat into stoicism, sarcasm, or silence. The inner world of men is a labyrinth, part fortress, part prison. Why do women so often turn away from these hidden chambers? Because to acknowledge their existence is to admit that men are vulnerable, not only to the world, but to women themselves. The myth of the invulnerable man is seductive precisely because it shields both sexes from the terrifying possibility of mutual dependence. If men can be wounded, then women can wound them. If men can be lost, then women can lose them. The balance of power teeters on a knife's edge, and so silence becomes the unspoken contract. But the roots of the problem go deeper still, into the tangled soil of evolution and history. Millennia of survival have wired men for competition, hierarchy, and the suppression of weakness. The hunter who hesitated, the warrior who wept, became a liability to the tribe. These patterns persist even as the world evolves. Aldous Huxley wrote that most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. We inherit not only our bodies, but the ghosts of unspoken rules. Yet the world has changed faster than biology can adapt. The skills once revered, physical strength, emotional restraint, dominance, are now suspect, sometimes even reviled. Men are told to evolve, but rarely shown how. Women are told to demand more, but rarely asked what it feels like to offer grace in the face of masculine struggle. This is the hidden problem. the collision between ancient programming and modern expectation, a fault line that runs through every relationship, every conversation, every quiet moment of doubt. Consider Sartre's existential maxim: existence precedes essence. Men are not born with a fixed nature. They become themselves through choices, through action, through the gaze of others. But what happens when every choice is circumscribed by invisible rules, every action judged by standards no one can name, every gaze heavy with expectation? A kind of psychic vertigo sets in, a loss of orientation, a sense of being perpetually on trial. And so, the brutal truth, the one women will never admit, even to themselves, is that men are haunted by a question they cannot ask: am I enough? Not just as providers or protectors, but as human beings. Every boast hides a doubt. Every conquest masks a fear of inadequacy. Every withdrawal is a silent plea for acceptance, for understanding, for the right to be flawed. But to see this truth is to risk empathy, and empathy is dangerous. It threatens to unravel the boundaries that keep us safe from each other's pain. It exposes the lie that men are simple, that their struggles are self-inflicted, that their silence is indifference rather than desperation. It calls women to a reckoning, not just with men, but with themselves, with the stories they have inherited and the roles they have chosen to play. As you consider these roots, psychological, philosophical, evolutionary, you feel the tension mounting. The problem is not one of malice or ignorance, but of blindness. We are all, in some sense, prisoners of the stories we refuse to question. But the consequences of this blindness are not abstract. They shape lives, ruin loves, and echo through generations. The next layer awaits, darker and more urgent than the last. What happens when these hidden truths are ignored? What price do we pay for silence, for denial, for the refusal to see? Are you ready to look at the consequences, the unseen wounds, the secret voice that ripple outward from this invisible fault line? Picture the world not as it appears in the soft glow of day, but as it truly is beneath the surface, in the shadows where unspoken truths gather like dust in forgotten corners. Imagine walking through a city at dawn, a silent procession of men shuffling to work, faces closed, shoulders hunched, every step measured as if the ground might give way beneath them. You pass them on the street, in the grocery aisles, sitting alone in cars at red lights, and beneath each calm exterior, you sense a private storm. This is the unseen cost of denial, the quiet epidemic of disconnection, a civilization of men and women living side by side but never truly meeting in the dark. The world has dressed these wounds in euphemism: midlife crisis, toxic masculinity, emotional unavailability, even the cold phrase male suicide rates. But these are only labels, not explanations. The real consequence is far subtler, far more corrosive. You witness it in the way men speak: words carefully chosen, laughter that edges toward aggression, silence that swells into chasms. You see it in the rituals of bravado and competition, the stories swapped like currency in bars and locker rooms, the refusal to admit weakness even as the soul quietly hemorrhages. And you see it too in the way women respond: frustration, confusion, disappointment, a sense of being locked out of a room they don't know how to enter. It is easy to blame the individual, to pathologize the man who retreats into work, addiction, or endless distraction. But the roots run deeper, entwined in the ways we are taught to see and not see each other. Cognitive biases do their silent work. Confirmation bias tells us that men are emotionally unavailable, so we see only the evidence that fits. The fundamental attribution error whispers that a man's withdrawal is callousness, never considering the possibility of pain. Culture conditions us to expect stoicism from men, then punishes them for delivering exactly that. Neuroscience tells us that the male brain, like the female, hungers for connection, for significance, for the balm of being truly seen. Mirror neurons fire in response to suffering, to to touch. Yet men often learn to dull these signals, to armor themselves against the vulnerability that empathy requires. Each time a boy is told to man up, a neuron flickers and goes dim. Each time a man's tears are met with shame or silence, a synaptic bridge is burned. Over years, these tiny wounds accumulate and the soul contracts. Society pays the price in ways few care to notice. Men drift through relationships, present in body but absent in spirit. Fathers struggle to connect with sons, repeating the rituals of distance they inherited. Lovers wonder why intimacy feels like chasing a ghost, why the man in their bed sometimes seems a million miles away. Friendships are built on shared activity, not shared vulnerability. Grief is swallowed whole or drowned in work and distraction. Women too suffer the consequences, though the world rarely names it as such. They find themselves aching for connection, but bewildered by the wall they sense in their partners. They may become caretakers, therapists, even adversaries, trying to coax or demand vulnerability without realizing how deeply the wounds run. Resentment festers on both sides. Each side blames the other for the loneliness that neither can articulate. Zoom out, and the pattern is everywhere. Marriages falter, children grow up learning that love is a transaction, workplaces become arenas for posturing and silent competition. The cost is measured in broken homes, in unexplained anger, in the epidemic of men who disappear, not just in the literal sense, but who vanish from life's emotional stage, ghosts in their own stories. Yet, the most devastating consequence is invisible, a quiet extinction of possibility. When men cannot reveal their wounds, when women cannot bear to see them, the world grows smaller. Imagination contracts, empathy withers, the very adventure of being human, the risk of loving and being loved, of failing and being forgiven, becomes a script acted out by sleepwalkers. Think of all the art never made, the kindness never expressed, the laughter stifled before it could rise. Think of the generations of sons who never heard their fathers say, "I'm afraid," and the daughters who grew up believing that strength meant silence. The consequences echo across time, growing louder with each repetition. The mind, desperate to escape the pain of this disconnection, invents stories. Men are just like that. He's too proud to change. She's asking for too much. These are not explanations, but anesthetics, numbing the wound without healing it. Each story becomes a brick in the wall that separates not only men from women, but each from themselves. But what if you could see the world differently? What if you could strip away the surface, the stories, the defenses, and see the raw, trembling humanity beneath? The consequences would be terrifying and liberating. For to see a man's pain is to risk feeling your own. To acknowledge his struggle is to admit that you too are vulnerable. There is a reason we avoid this reckoning. It threatens the order of things. Empathy is not safe, it is revolutionary. It destabilizes the hierarchies we have spent millennia constructing. It asks us to surrender the comfort of our roles and step into the discomfort of mutual recognition. And yet, the cracks are beginning to show. The old scripts are breaking down. Men and women alike are starting to ask questions that cannot be answered with cliches. What would happen if we stopped blaming and began listening? What if, instead of demanding change, we offered understanding? What if the first rebellion is simply to see, truly see, what has always been hidden in plain sight? The answers are not easy. The path forward is uncertain. But the consequences of continuing on as we have are clearer than ever. A world of silent suffering, of relationships that never quite breathe, of lives half-lived. The cost of denial is nothing less than the possibility of genuine connection. The time has come for rebellion, not against each other, but against the stories that keep us apart. Are you ready to break free from the unseen trap? Or will you choose the comfort of blindness and pay the price in silence? A new possibility glimmers on the horizon, a chance to shatter the old order and build something radically different. But the first step is the hardest, the courage to see and to be seen. The moment of reckoning has arrived. The silence is no longer a comfort, but a suffocating shroud. Something inside you, some ancient, stubborn spark, refuses to accept that this is all there is. Men trapped behind walls, women circling outside, both aching for a connection neither knows how to begin. The unseen consequences have become unbearable. Denial is no longer an option. The only path left is rebellion. But rebellion in this context is not what you have been taught to imagine. It is not a shout, a fist, a toppling of kings. It is quieter and more dangerous, a revolution that happens in the space between two people, in the vulnerable pause after a confession, in the long, trembling moment when the truth is finally spoken. You sense the risk. To break free from the inherited scripts is to walk a tightrope without a net. Yet history whispers of those who have done it. Men and women who refused to play the roles assigned to them, who dared to be seen in their full, trembling humanity. They are not always celebrated. Sometimes they are ignored or ridiculed or misunderstood, but they carry something precious, a freedom that cannot be given, only claimed. The rebellion begins in the mind, a radical shift in perspective. Imagine seeing every man you know not as a collection of faults or virtues, not as a puzzle to be solved or a problem to be fixed, but as a mystery to be encountered. Imagine that behind every silence, every boast, every moment of withdrawal, there is not indifference but fear, not pride but longing. What if every act of bravado is a coded message? Will you still love me if I show you who I really am? Now imagine going further. Imagine you are the first to step into the unknown. Instead of demanding vulnerability, you offer it. Instead of waiting for the other to break the silence, you speak first, not with accusation, but with a confession of your own uncertainty, your own hunger for connection. The rebellion is not against men, but against the stories that have kept both men and women trapped. Consider the example of Anton Chekhov, who wrote of men and women not as types, but as individuals, each haunted by their own ghosts, each longing for forgiveness. Or the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, who saw that freedom is not something given, but seized in the act of transcending one's circumstances. Or the countless unnamed souls who, in quiet rooms and late-night conversations, have risked everything to say, "This is who I am. Will you meet me here?" The counterintuitive truth is this: the way forward is not to demand that men become what women want, nor to insist that women accept men as they are. It is to create a space where both can be unfinished, uncertain, and real. This requires a kind of courage that is rarer than genius. The courage to face rejection, to sit with the discomfort, to remain open when every instinct screams to retreat. You begin to see that the roles you have inherited are not destiny, but habit. You can refuse them. You can choose something different. Begin with small acts of rebellion. When a man you love withdraws, do not chase or accuse. Instead, offer presence without demand. When you sense bravado, listen for the fear beneath. When you feel frustration, ask yourself what pain might lie behind the mask. The rebellion is not without cost. There will be moments of misunderstanding, of anger, of grief for the years lost to silence. But each act of seeing, of being seen, plants a seed for a new way of being. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response. In that space, you can choose rebellion. You notice that each time you choose presence over demand, curiosity over accusation, something shifts. The walls do not crumble overnight, but cracks appear. A man who has never spoken of his fears finds himself telling a story from childhood. A woman who has learned to hide her disappointment lets her voice tremble and finds it met not with scorn, but with relief. Each time, the old scripts lose a little of their power. This is the secret history of every revolution. It begins with a single act of honesty, and then another, and another. The world changes not in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of risk. Each act of rebellion is an invitation to yourself and to the other to step into the unknown. You begin to see that the walls between men and women are not made of stone, but of stories. And stories can be rewritten. The rebellion is not about conquering or escaping, but about returning to the place where it all began, the place of shared vulnerability. Here, the paradox is revealed. The only way to break free is to surrender the illusion of safety and risk being hurt, risk being changed. You realize that the most radical act is not to reject men or to fix them, but to meet them as fellow travelers, wounded, longing, unfinished. To say, I see you, not as you pretend to be, but as you are. And in that moment, something ancient shifts. The old order cracks. A new possibility is born. You stand at the edge of this new world trembling. The rebellion is not over. It has only just begun. But you sense the power in your hands, the power to choose, to change, to create something that has never existed before. The question now is not whether you will rebel, but how deeply you are willing to go. What will you risk for the chance to be free? What will you surrender for the chance to be real? The final, ultimate truth awaits, just beyond the horizon of fear. Will you step forward, or will you turn back, content with the comfort of old lies? You stand upon the threshold, the hush before the dawn of an entirely new world. The rebellion has cracked the old order. The walls of silence have begun to crumble. But what remains when the dust settles, when the comforting myths have been swept away? What truth emerges, naked and unguarded in the clearing? Imagine this. The room is quiet, but charged. Two people face each other, stripped of pretense, holding the gaze a moment longer than comfort allows. No armor, no script, no desperate grasping for the upper hand. Just the trembling presence of two souls, each carrying scars, each hoping for mercy. The air is electric, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. This is the moment when the final, brutal truth reveals itself. It is not a truth about men only, nor about women alone. It is the truth of our shared humanity, the recognition that the boundaries we have defended so fiercely were never real. Only lines drawn in the sand by frightened children. The ultimate secret is this: the wounds we see in men are not theirs alone, but mirrors of our own. Every accusation, every stereotype, every longing for the other to change is, in the end, a plea for our own pain to be witnessed and understood. Men's silence is not a fortress, but a reflection of the silence we all carry. Their hunger for respect, for significance, for love without condition. These are not foreign needs, but the very ones that drive us all. The brutal truth is that there is no other side. There is only us, divided by illusions, yearning to be whole. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Hell is other people," but perhaps he was only half right. Hell is the distance we keep, the refusal to see ourselves in the face of the other. And heaven, if it exists, is the place where that distance collapses, where we dare to risk everything on the hope that our vulnerability will not be used against us. Look again at the man before you, father, brother, lover, friend, stranger. Strip away the layers of expectation, of disappointment, of ancient grievance. What remains is a being as fragile, as desperate for meaning, as haunted by mortality as you are. His bravado is your perfectionism. His silence is your secret shame. His longing for approval is your own. The old stories crumble with this realization. The notion that men are mysterious, impenetrable, or fundamentally different dissolves in the light of shared suffering. What women cannot admit about men is what men cannot admit about themselves. That beneath the posturing, the withdrawal, the desperate striving, there is only the human heart, terrified of rejection, starving for acceptance. But this truth is not only a comfort, it is a summons. For to see the other as yourself is to accept a terrible responsibility. You can no longer hide behind blame or wait for the other to change. The work of healing, of connection, of building a world beyond silence is now yours to begin. Now the paradox reveals itself fully. The brutal truth you feared would destroy love is the only thing that can save it. To see men as they are, not as you wish them to be, is to invite yourself into the same radical honesty. To stop demanding perfection is to allow yourself to be imperfect. To grieve the wounds of the other is to finally recognize your own. Cinematic, the world seems to hush in the presence of this revelation. The years of misunderstanding, of heartbreak, of blaming and defending are not wasted. They were the crucible in which this moment was forged. You are not who you were when this journey began. You are something more. Someone who has looked into the abyss and seen not a monster, but your own reflection. Now the question changes. No longer, what is the brutal truth women will never admit about men, but what is the truth you will finally admit to yourself? Will you allow the old wounds to define you, or will you risk everything for the possibility of something new? Will you choose to see, to listen, to forgive, not as an act of charity, but as the only way to break the cycle of suffering? The answer is not given. It is made moment by trembling moment in the choices you make from here onward. In every encounter, every silence, every act of courage or retreat, you are writing the next chapter of the human story. The old myths no longer bind you unless you choose to let them. And so as the first light breaks over the horizon, you realize the journey was never about men alone or women alone, but about the courage to face the fullness of the human condition. The brutality of the truth is matched only by its beauty. We are all wounded, all longing, all afraid. And yet, in the act of seeing and being seen, of naming the pain and still choosing hope, we become capable of something miraculous. Love that is not a bargain, but a recognition. Connection that is not a performance, but a homecoming. Leave this place changed. Let yourself be haunted, not by the fear of what you might find in the other, but by the stunning possibility of genuine intimacy. Let the silence between you and the men in your life become not a wall, but an invitation. Let the old questions fall away, replaced by the only one that matters. Can we meet here in the truth of our shared humanity? The world will resist. The old stories will whisper their seductions. But you have seen what lies beyond them. The rest is up to you. Dare to see. Dare to be seen. And in that naked, trembling space, dare to love.